Hi there, my name is Lily Ampleford. I'm from Pearson and I'm delighted to be here today to share some of the amazing stories from our Listen Colour pioneers. So I thought I'd start by sharing a brief history of the Listen Colour Pioneers programme. This year we teamed up with Penguin and the Runnymede Trust to help make a real difference in 100 secondary schools across the country. The Listen Colour Pioneers programme was born with Penguin kindly providing copies of our GCSE and A-level set texts and a fantastic 300 book library donation, as well as our further support course materials, a dedicated professional development programme spanning the length of the 2-year course, training for librarians, author events with the likes of Mallory Blackman, and racial literacy training from the Black curriculum. Now, that's a really brief overview, but if you want to learn more about what the Listen Colour programme entails, you can visit our website, and the link for that is go.pearson.com/Listen Colour. Don't worry if you don't remember that, it's on a slide later on as well. So before we kick off, I'd like to share how you can get involved in the conversations today as well. If you have any thoughts, feel free to pop them on our Menti board, and the details are on the slide here. So you should just go to www.menti.com and then use that code. And also, if you have any questions for us, please use the Q&A chat on Zoom and we can get them answered for you. So we have 3 pioneers that will be sharing their experiences of today. Our first up is our pioneer, Amanda Gorman. She's from Barnard Castle School and she's recorded a little video sharing her experiences so far.
Hi, my name is Amanda Gorman and I'm the Head of English at Barnard Castle School. And we are extremely proud to have become pioneers in Lit.
Apologies for the buffering, we'll give it a minute and see if it loads.
We decided to apply because we wanted to explore issues surrounding Hi, my name is Amanda Gorman and I'm the Head of English at Barnard Castle School. And we are extremely proud to have become pioneers in Lit. We decided to apply because we wanted to explore issues surrounding diversity. And as a school in the north of England, we're not hugely culturally diverse, so it allowed us to start discussing issues with pupils in a sensitive way that they might not yet meet in the real world. So far, it's been fantastic, really enriching, extraordinarily reassuring that our pupils are able to discuss these kinds of issues, even though they haven't met some of them, with real maturity, and we've fed that into the rest of the curriculum. So under a new curriculum that's entitled Project Umbrella, diversity is now a huge part of our everyday life. So we've fed texts into English, but they're actually being fed into other subjects as well. So it's across the curriculum. So we are studying an English refugee boy, and that has raised all sorts of issues and discussions. Obviously, Benjamin Zephaniah is amazing anyway, but we've looked at poetry alongside it, and it's been fabulous. So the students think it's great, they love it, and I don't think they're enormously aware that we fed it in deliberately in quite this way, but they are aware that there is a library of books that they can choose from. So every English department classroom has a mini library of the books that you sent us. So thank you very much for those. They're amazing. And they've been borrowed. So one of my shelves is actually empty already because it's completely disappeared. And they're being borrowed by staff and pupils. So I've had discussions about diversity, styles of writing, voices, with staff as well as pupils, and that's allowed staff to feed those kinds of discussions into their lessons too, with the Project Umbrella scheme in mind, but actually in other ways quite naturally. One of our younger members of staff said that the text yields excellent discussions about being different sometimes, caring for others. Quite a lot of students at Barnard Castle School haven't had to think about racial issues, and they've started to consider what might be entailed in those kinds of subjects. So it's helped us enormously to diversify our curriculum. And I'm looking forward to attending a lot more Pioneer in Lit discussions and online forum in the future. So thank you very much for choosing us. We're enormously proud to have been chosen, and we will continue to use the text in every way that we possibly can.
And now I will share a video from Penguin.
My name.
So Penguin also visited Turing House School earlier in the year and spoke with students about their experience studying Boys Don't Cry.
We were taught half a dozen Shakespeare plays, we were taught Christmas Carol, we were taught Journey's End. They're great books and plays, but they're all at the very least 80 years old, each of them. So I think it was important to get like a modern text that represents the society we currently live in.
This is Turing House School in Twickenham, where we joined the last English lesson of a GCSE class studying Boys Don't Cry by Malorie Blackman.
It talks about how certain things should be able to be accepted by everyone.
It's okay to show emotion, it's okay to show love for one another, it's okay to cry.
Boys Don't Cry is one of the few texts by a writer of colour on the GCSE syllabus.
On the board is an excerpt of a review of Boys Don't Cry. I want you to read.
Hayley changed her class's set text this year in a conscious effort to modernise and diversify the way English literature is taught at the school.
I've been with these students since they were in Year 7, and it's really exciting to be able to teach a text that was powerful and emotional and relevant to our students.
Here's what they think of the book.
I feel like it talks about some topics that need to be talked about, like the prejudice against people, which most of the books we have studies don't talk about.
Our world now should match the authors, and the stuff that we write about should match our present world now.
Unfortunately, this class is the exception. Despite almost 35% of school-aged children in England identifying as Black, Asian or minority ethnic, less than 1% of GCSE candidates study a book by a writer of colour.
I think that it needs to change. There should be more diversity within that. People need to experience different things.
I do think that there are obviously a lot of good writers who are white and also who are Black and from different backgrounds as well. And I think they all equally have their own talents.
I'd just quite simply say, why not? Of course, we should have more ethnicities in the boards and stuff for teaching. I think I don't know why it's not already a thing. Why not? It should definitely be a thing.
I feel very grateful with our school for letting us read books from different ethnicities.
Boys Don't Cry and things like that are really good for young people to see, because that kind of material being out there is good for young people to learn what's wrong, what's right. Black and white, they still have all shared experiences, they have different backgrounds, and they'll still get on with life together.
What other forms of prejudice do we have, Eddie? Immediately, I thought my students are going to like this, and I thought it'd be really interesting to teach the students about the dual narrative and why Blackman chose to have that dual narrative and what the effects are. You know, we're allowed to have these conversations in a GCSE English lesson. This is great.
Students discuss what studying Malorie Blackman's book means to them.
Sexuality is a key theme due to the fact that it's still a very prominent issue in today's society, and even when the book was written in 2010.
Well, in society, it's obviously frowned upon for men to be able to show their emotions, and it's not normal for boys to cry. And then in the book, it talks about how it is okay, and that certain things should be able to be accepted by everyone.
I chose not to tell the students that Dante was black. I wanted them to have the same experience as I did reading it. And so that moment when we're reading it in class and it's a throwaway comment and some students just missed it, didn't really realise as we were reading, and I paused and just looked at the students, and seeing their reactions at that moment, I think was a really powerful moment of teaching, not just for the appreciation of literature, but also just getting students to examine their own unconscious biases, perhaps.
When she revealed that they were black, I think what she was also trying to do is force the reader to examine their own prejudice, is like look back on the text and think, before they were revealed that they were black, what did I think that these people were? Were they white? Were they black? Were they anything? And it's just examine your own prejudice and try to amend yourself in any way you need.
Thinking about the profile of some of our classes where lots of students aren't that excited, to be honest, about literature, and being able to introduce Boys Don't Cry to them, and the way that they've responded so positively goes to show that clearly they just love reading a text that feels familiar to them, feels like they can see themselves in a way in those texts, in those characters, or feels like they can relate to the issues that the characters are facing.
It helps me understand other people's views, to understand where they're coming from.
I find it easy to contribute during class as well, because I find it a lot more relatable and I can give my thoughts and opinions.
What my hope for my students is they leave school having read and appreciated a variety of texts. I think every student has a right to see themselves reflected in the literature that they study.
Lit in Colour is a project from Penguin Books to support inclusive reading in schools. Get involved at penguin.co.uk/lit in colour.
Great. And finally, I'm really happy to introduce Brianna McLean from Waldingham School. So welcome, Brianna.
Thank you very much. As Lily's just mentioned, my name is Brianna McLean and I'm the head of English at Waldingham School. And I'd really like to preface this talk by saying I do not profess to be an expert in matters pertaining to diversity and inclusion, but I'm very happy to share our experiences with you and hopefully you will find them to be helpful. Are you able to move to the next slide, Lily? And the next one, if you could, please. Thank you very much. Now, I wanted to begin by speaking a little bit about why we chose to become a pioneer. And I really think that these three images illustrate the necessity of diversifying our English literature curriculum quite succinctly. Now, I should clarify that whilst we don't contest the greatness of Orwell, Shakespeare, or Dickens' contributions to the literary canon, it goes without saying that these writers are just not reflective of our student body and arguably of modern Britain. And that just for us really reiterated the necessity of diversifying. And if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I think when we really first became conscious of the need to diversify was with the curriculum changes that were introduced in 2015. And we noted that there was quite a disparity between the revised GCSE curriculum and the A-level curriculum. Now, with the A-level, we thought that there was a lot of positive changes. So, for example, we swapped Tess of the D'Urbervilles for 1,000 Splendid Suns. And there's lots of other scope to diversify elsewhere on the curriculum as well. And for us, that change has been hugely successful in that it has given our students the opportunity to explore different voices, different perspectives, different cultural and religious contexts that they were otherwise wholly unfamiliar with in many cases, and that they hadn't encountered elsewhere, either in English literature or in their study of history, of politics, more broadly. And I think that really helps promote empathy and just helps to make our students much better global citizens. On the other hand, we found that the revised specification for GCSE was a bit more problematic. And we saw the removal of a number of multicultural texts, such as Of Mice and Men. Now, I know that Of Mice and Men is obviously a problematic text. However, it did give us the opportunity to explore issues such as racism, sexism, ableism. And we also found the English language qualification to be problematic as well. And although other schools might not have encountered this, we found that students often required almost a cultural understanding of Britain to access the so-called quality press articles. And we found that was quite alienating to a number of our overseas students, and even a number of our British students either fail to understand the text or really to kind of engage with them. They didn't see them as relevant. And that lack of engagement and literary representation is really what led us to adopt the IGCSE English language qualification instead. As a private school, we were quite lucky that we had that opportunity. And it was interesting because as soon as we switched over to that IGCSE, which is with Edexcel as well, we found that students were so much more engaged with the content, and that's because it was much more representative of our student body and arguably modern Britain. Though I should clarify that at the time, the mainstream English language 2.0 wasn't available, and I think that we would have felt quite differently about it had it been. Now, kind of looking in terms of why we became a pioneer, we were thinking again about moving to the IGCSE for English literature, having had that success with the English language qualification. But when we saw the Pioneers program become available, we thought that would just be the perfect opportunity to diversify and to have some support along the way. First and foremost, it really marked our commitment to diversifying our curriculum. I think with all of the changes that we've faced over the last 2 years and all of the challenges that teachers have faced between tags and CAGs and remote learning and having to digitize everything and so much disruption, it is a lot easier to say, oh, in the long term, we'll diversify, we'll put it up next year. And by applying to become pioneers, it really made us accountable to make sure that we did in fact diversify the curriculum. And I think it also signaled to our students, to parents and to colleagues elsewhere in the school that this is something that we see is really important and something that we are keen to follow through. It's not just a kind of performative or tokenistic gesture in making the odd tweak here and there. I think the other reason why we really wanted to become a pioneer was we have a marked lack of diversity in our departments. And also, although a number of us have family members and in some cases our own children that are from different cultural backgrounds, we as a department are all white, and we really feared coming across as patronizing. And so we wanted to make sure that we had the necessary support and training available to make sure that we implemented changes as effectively as possible and that we made the right lexical choices, for example. If you can move to the next one. Thank you very much. In terms of our experience thus far, we started with a whole school audit on diversity and inclusion. And we really asked departments across the school what they're doing now and what they could do in the short and medium terms. And we asked them to, for those who perhaps struggled to answer those questions, we asked them to think about the top sort of 3 to 5 contributions that their department could make to improve diversity and inclusivity at our school. And although the focus of the Lit and Colour programme is obviously on race, we looked at wider protected characteristics as well, such as gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, faith, and disability, or people who are differently abled. And what that audit did was it really highlighted for us how little scope there is to diversify curricula at Key Stage 4 and 5 across most subjects, and including subjects that you would think would lend themselves quite well to discussion of more kind of diverse topics. So subjects such as history or biology, for example, there just isn't the scope there at this point in time. And so for us, that really reiterated how important it is to make sure that we embed diversity into the curriculum and make it just part of the fabric of the school. I went to a conference earlier this year where they likened diversity and inclusion to safeguarding, in that it's something that underpins everything else. It's not a box that can be ticked, so to speak. And I think that was a really helpful analogy for us, and something that we'll continue to look to as we continuously look at how we can improve the diversity and inclusivity at our school. In terms of some specific ways in which we've embedded diversity into the curriculum, we have thought a lot about the imaging that we use. So even if that is just in the context of a PowerPoint that you have in a lesson or displays around the school, where could we perhaps be a little bit more inclusive in the images that we choose? Other things that we've done is, in 2020, we put together a Black Lives Matter reading list. And instead of just sort of putting a poster on the wall, we tried to make it more meaningful. So for example, the sixth form led some reading groups on a number of the texts, and even students who hadn't read those specific texts were welcome to join those groups. Similarly, this year, we are going to be running a series of lectures on post-colonial literature, which feature texts such as, or sort of canonical texts, such as Thomas Hardy, but also texts like by Margaret Atwood and Arundhati Roy. And we're also looking at sort of putting together a magazine on inspirational female writers. And as you can see on that poster below, and again, while we have canonical writers such as Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, we've tried to be more diverse in our selection there. So we make sure that we've got something from Zadie Smith, Maya Angelou is on there. And we have a quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie as well. In terms of our text choice, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. In terms of our text choice, the two areas where we've diversified the GCSE English literature curriculum is our adoption of the Belonging Poetry Anthology and Mallory Blackman's Boys Don't Cry. Now, if you're sort of perhaps feeling a bit daunted by the prospect of diversifying your curriculum or just don't know where to begin, I highly recommend moving to the Belonging collection. As you can see, I've highlighted here, there are far more female voices and writers of color than in other collections. And our students have found the poems to be really topical and really engaging. We used to teach the relationships anthology, and some of the texts in there they really enjoyed as well. But this has elicited some fantastic comments from students who otherwise might be a little bit disengaged from our study of poetry. And it's been, I would say, a wholly sort of positive experience for us. With regard to our choice of novel, which I should say we haven't actually started teaching yet, as you saw from my opening slide, in our existing curriculum, all of the writers are sort of dead white men, and the most recent text was published over 75 years ago. And so we really wanted a female writer, and ideally we wanted a writer of color. In terms of the text itself, we wanted a text that was much more relevant to our student body and equally more representative of our student body. And things that we liked about Boys Don't Cry is that, as has been mentioned already, the protagonist is Black, but I wouldn't say that race is a theme in the text. And again, this has been alluded to already, but I think that was really powerful, because one thing that I have found, and the history department here has found as well, is so often when we see race in a text, it often has sort of negative connotations and often associated with conflict, be that external or internal. And here he just happens to be Black. And I think again, it's working to sort of, as some of the students in that clip spoke so eloquently about, it normalizes that representation in literature and calls us to face our own prejudices, which I think is really important. Again, this has been mentioned earlier already, but the other thing we liked about it is that it also explores gender and sexual orientation, and it features a character who is openly gay and very content and confident about his sexuality. And like all schools, we have a number of students who are who are kind of exploring their own gender identity and their own sexuality. And again, to see that representation in literature, I think is really important for them. If you could move to the next one, please. Thank you very much. Coming back to our experience, once we had chosen these texts, the very first thing that we did at the start of this year was we had an assembly on the Lit and Colour Pioneers programme. And what we tried to do in that assembly is really engage our students as much as possible so that they didn't sort of switch into assembly mode and just switch off. And we wanted to reiterate that we're really trying to make meaningful change. And what we didn't want is for our participation in the Pioneers program to be seen as tokenistic or performative. So some of the ways that we tried to really kind of grab their attention was we showed those images of Orwell and Shakespeare and Dickens and asked them to guess who they were. And we also posed some questions about and kind of guessing to guess statistics. So we asked them what percentage of GCSE English literature students study a book by a woman. They were all wildly optimistic, but it is actually only 7%. And we also asked them what percentage study a book by a woman of colour, which is 0.1%, which they were all quite shocked and alarmed by. And we also challenged students to really think about what defines great literature and to kind of question the literary canon itself and the omissions from it that perhaps need to be revisited and revised. And finally, our sixth form students discussed their favourite books by writers of colour. And what was nice is that we saw an immediate response to this. Our students went to the library at break, so shortly after assembly, and again at lunch, in search of these new texts. And so now we just need to look at how we can keep that momentum going. Once we had led this assembly, we then looked at introducing the Belonging anthology. Now we've taught this, it's with one cohort, but we taught the first couple of poems last year in the end of the summer term and carried on into the autumn term. And I've spoken about the anthology already, but one thing that I think is maybe worth reiterating is that we had a really positive reception from this. And the students loved that they had this presentation of different voices and literary perspectives. And one thing that we've been very mindful of is wherever possible, we've been trying to get the poets reading or videos of the poets reading their poems in their own voices. Now, in some cases, that's not possible, but I would argue it's a lot less problematic for me to read Mild the Mist Upon the Hill by Emily Bronte than it is for me to read Raymond Antrobus's Jamaican British or Kyle Chingoni's Kumakanda. I think it takes on a different meaning when it's read from their own voices. Now, looking ahead, in the summer term, we're going to introduce Boys Don't Cry to our Year 9 students. And in the spring term, we're actually going to be involved in a research program run by Oxford University. And what that seeks to do is it'll be looking at the impact of studying contemporary texts by a writer from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background. And they're looking at the impact not only on students, but teachers as well. So that's something that we're really looking forward to. Thank you very much. The last thing I was asked to speak about was the support that we've received from the Pioneers programme. As you can see there, we were delighted with a very generous book donation. And again, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, it's really enthused both students and staff as well. And it's exposed us to a huge number of writers and texts that we were unfamiliar with. And in some cases, we haven't actually been able to fit all of the texts on the shelves. And where we've had a collection of several books, several copies of the same book, we've run book clubs. And so just last week, we had a staff book club on A Thousand Splendid Suns, and which was very well received. And I came in to speak about our students' reception of that text. And I think it's really important that students see this love of literature among the staff and love of literature that explores different cultural backgrounds modeled to them. And that's, I think, again, that's really important to inspire their own reading. In terms of resourcing, there is a ton of tons of resources available on the Pearson edX Hub website. So again, if you're perhaps feeling a little bit daunted about how to go about diversifying your text, you would not be starting from scratch. Although we haven't, we're in the process of writing our scheme of work for Boys Don't Cry, and there are lots and lots of resources available there already. We found it hugely helpful in putting together our scheme of work for the Belonging Poetry Anthology. And finally, in terms of training events, I attended a training session led by Benjamin Zephaniah, although we didn't share that with our students because we didn't feel it was quite sort of it wasn't quite appropriate at the time. I spoke about it with them, and again, it made him relevant to them. They asked loads and loads and loads of questions, and it was lovely to see that enthusiasm for him. And because for us, since we do the IGCSE as well, he's on both the language and the literature specification for them, and they still ask me questions about him, even though we haven't looked at either of his texts for several weeks now, and that was great. And the Mallory Blackman training event was fantastic. Again, we haven't shared that with our students just yet because we haven't started teaching Boys Don't Cry, but we certainly will and see their reaction to it in the summer term. And that's where we are at the moment. So I hope that you find that helpful.
Thank you, Brianna. I think that everyone will agree that that was really, really useful. Really good overview. So I'm going to ask a few questions now, but feel free to drop your own questions in the chat. I will get to as many as possible in the time that we've got. So yeah, you should be able to just drop them either in the chat or the Q&A box. Well, I'm going to start off with a question. So you've talked a little bit about the events. Could you tell us a bit about what your favourite event has been and why it was your favourite?
That's a really good question. For me, I really liked the Benjamin Zephaniah event. I need to reacquaint myself with it before having to to answer that question in sufficient detail. But things I like about it is, again, it really humanized him for me. And I think because at the time I had just been annotating We Refugees in preparation for teaching, and we've been looking at Young and Dyslexic as well for the IGCSE English Literature specification. Again, I think because I was able to bring in various kind of tidbits when talking about him with my students, even little things, they're like, what's his house like, and what's his office like, and that's the thing. Again, it just humanized him. And I think that's again, Mallory Blackman's was really interesting as well in terms of her discussions of her motivations behind the text. And again, she was very careful not to give away any spoilers and that sort of thing, but in terms of her discussing what motivated her to include particular features or what have you, I think our students will really respond to that well. But I think for me, because I hadn't had the experience of engaging with that writer, with that text, with students yet, I found Benjamin Zephaniah's talk particularly engaging, just like I say, just because it really humanized him and improved the kind of relevancy both for me and for other teachers in the department, and certainly for our students as well.
Yeah, and Benjamin Zephaniah is such a good performer. He read a poem in that event, and it was really quite fascinating to listen to.
And again, that's actually, it went on to inspire us to show more of his work to our students as well, to get a sense of his voice. And that's again, coming back to what I was saying before about we're trying to get texts delivered in the writer's voice themselves rather than our own, I think is really important. And so, say for example, again, it's not in this collection, but we were looking at Young and Dyslexic in the IGCSE nonfiction anthology. And although we couldn't find him reading that text, we did find a YouTube video in which he talks about his experience of dyslexia. And the room was, I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that room, because it's a topic that is really relevant to a lot of them. They find it really engaging. And for students who aren't necessarily normally represented or haven't been represented historically in a lot of the literature that we write, they just love to see that representation in literature, and I think that's really important.
Definitely. And you've talked quite a bit about the Belonging Poetry Anthology. Were there any particular sort of moments that really stood out to you when you were teaching, and kind of how did your students react to it?
I think for me, something that was really useful is I teach one group where the students are all EAL, and they tend to be quite quiet. They always want to say the right thing, and I think particularly when they're studying a text with kind of a little bit more archaic language, be that 18th or 19th century language, they don't understand it, they don't engage with it, and they sort of switch off. And to see my students being really quite vocal, especially in certain texts like My Mother's Kitchen, they loved it. I mean, the annotations that I have, I've got it in front of me here. I mean, this was or the Umgri or My Mother's Kitchen, Kumakanda, Jamaican British, you can see. And I mean, I had middle to groups that need a little bit more support. And you can see our annotations are just absolutely covered. They had so much to say about it, and for me that's really exciting. I taught a set D for the last 2 years, and we looked at the relationships anthology, and it was just trying to really felt that you're having to kind of drag them through it, and there was none of that this time. I had a set D again this year, and they were coming up with fantastic points and things that I hadn't necessarily kind of come across. And because we have students from so many different cultural backgrounds, they were really drawing on their own experiences as well, and students who I think particularly some of our overseas borders really responded very well to it. I think some of our students who are Black or mixed race really responded to a lot of the texts, such as Jamaican British. A couple of them spoke very emotively about their own experiences. And so I think I don't know that there was one singular standout moment for me. It was more that it's just consistent engagement across, and even where they came across a poem that they were perhaps less keen on, because we had these really engaging discussions about poems elsewhere in the anthology. I should say we didn't teach it in chronologically. And because we had these really engaging discussions elsewhere, they were able to apply that to the poems that otherwise they perhaps didn't respond to quite as well. And so there was just really lovely dynamism in our class discussions, much more so than I've had previously. And so that was really exciting for us.
That's really good. And what would you say to somebody who's considering getting involved in the Listen Colour programme?
I would definitely encourage. I would, wholeheartedly encourage it. I think it's been really positive for us as a school. I think sometimes, if you want to do it, I think I would encourage people to be to make sure that you have a bit of a thick skin, and just to be as. Make sure that you have really open conversations with members of staff, talk a lot about what you want to do and why. And I think where you have these open conversations, you can really move forward together in a really positive way. I think obviously, since the Lit and Colour programme focuses primarily on race, obviously there's a lot of hugely emotive issues connected with that. And I think where you will get things wrong, and you can have two people from exactly the same cultural background, and one will take objection to a particular lexical choice that the other one would like you to use, and so I think just making sure you're kind of having those conversations about why you're doing what you are, to listen to students, to listen to other members of staff, to not be afraid to make these changes. But I do think that it is. For us, like I say, it's been a very positive move, and I think it has been, like I say, a really positive response from students. We've seen it from staff throughout the school as well, and I wholeheartedly encourage people to get involved.
Great. We don't currently have any questions in the chat, so now is your chance if you want to ask any questions. In the meantime, Brianna, is there anything else that you'd like to add that you maybe haven't had the chance to yet? The answer can be no if you've covered it all.
I don't think so. I think I've covered most. I mean, I'm conscious that we haven't actually started teaching the target text yet, so we might not be perhaps as useful as some of the other speakers in terms of that. But like I say, I think if anybody wanted to kind of start this journey towards diversifying their curriculum and wasn't really sure where to begin, I think the Belonging Anthology is a great way to do that. There is a lot of resourcing available on the Pearson Edexcel website, and because it's only 15 poems, it is a little bit more sort of, again, doable in the constraints of time and what have you. And like I say, our students loved it. We've been teaching it with our year 10s in the autumn term, and we're going to start teaching it with our year 9s in the spring, and a couple of them kind of had a sneak preview. Just this morning I was speaking to some of them, and they were really excited about some of the writers that appear in that anthology. So I would definitely encourage people, even if for whatever reason they choose not to become a lit and colour pioneer, I would definitely encourage them to move to the Belonging Anthology.
Brilliant, thank you. So I will move on. I've covered the questions. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background around the Lit in Colour programme. So we're really, really excited to announce that we will be running the programme again in 2022. So if you are not already an existing pioneer, now is your chance. So what you'll need to do is just register your interest at this point. In January, we'll be sharing more information about the programme and how you can get involved. There is an application process, but it's really quite straightforward. And also don't forget that we've got more sessions taking place over the course of this week. So tomorrow we have the Bigger Picture of Diversity event, and as Brianna alluded to, you know, diversity and inclusion is much more than race. So that event's really going to be covering more of the kind of areas of inclusivity, and we've got a really fantastic panel lined up for that. And then we've got our closing remarks and a chance for networking with the other attendees of the sessions as well later on in the day tomorrow. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.